When you connect with the meaning, with the why behind your work, you go home happier, you do better at your work, you become more collaborative, more creative. And there's numbers, there's percentages here in the research that show this. There's a study from Blue Zones that says purpose-driven people live 7 years longer. And if that's not enough, there's a study I found that said purpose-driven people are more attractive. So there's tons of evidence out there that show the benefits, not just to the individual. You know, I always say being purpose-driven is unequivocally the best thing that is good for, like in my industry, it's good for healthcare, right? It's good for your company, and it's good for all of us because we all are or will be patients or caregivers at some point, right? So it's just good for everyone. The problem is most of us aren't purpose-driven. That's the gap. That's what I'm trying to change, because it's just good for everybody when we do connect with it.
Hello and welcome to the Conspiracy of Goodness podcast, where you'll hear folks that should be rising to the top of our news feeds and social media, but for some reason, the negative news and social just can't focus on what's right with the world. It is still an amazing world out there, and the people we're talking to and writing about are evidence of that all around us. We can get started with that right now with our guest, Jill Donahue. Jill is a researcher, a teacher, a speaker who is lifting others up through an acclaimed program called The Power of Purpose. And in today's episode, she shares with us through a very unique lens how we can get closer to feeling like we can live with something she calls noble intention in whatever line of work we're in. And as we do so often at the Goodness Exchange and the Conspiracy of Goodness podcast, we're going to open new landscapes in our own lives by breaking down some of the myths in a pretty aligned field, Big Pharma. Now, this interview is not about Big Pharma, but it is about the most amazing people there. And that's why I'm interviewing Jill, because she has written an amazing new free ebook called A Dose of Inspiration, 100 Purpose Stories from Pharma Leaders. Yes, that world, like all others, has its bad actors, but turns out also, like what's common in our media, the really wonderful people leading with heart and great intention, well, their stories are not rising to the top. So Jill Donahue, welcome to the Conspiracy of Goodness podcast.
Thank you, Linda. It's so fun to be chatting with you again. I've been looking forward to it.
Oh, well, the reason why Jill's saying again there is because we've had some rousing pre-calls.
Yes, we have.
Oh my gosh. Jill has
So
introduced
fun.
me to some other great thought leaders that are going to be interviewed on this podcast. And she and I just fell over a cliff together in the discovery again of all that's going on that's right. So I can't wait to get right at this for people so they know that this interview is going to be about them and what's possible if we just get rid of some of our limiting beliefs and move on to this topic of leading with purpose, because that's your whole gig, right? Is you have a pharma story, a story of your personal life that brought you here, which I want you to tell in a minute. But you're helping people in pharma lead with purpose and discover these hidden motivations in their why. So talk to us about all this.
Yeah, it was a big aha for me years ago when I was teaching people how to engage, how to communicate better. And I had this moment when I was teaching these students where I thought, oh my gosh, they could use what I'm teaching them for ethical engagement, ethical influence. And I thought to myself, there's something here that I'm not communicating, but I know to be true. And that is when you lead with a noble intention, when you lead with purpose to do good in the world, that's when everything falls into place. So I went back to the literature. Before that, I was working on adult education principles. And I went back to the literature, and right about then there was this explosion in the literature on being purpose-driven. So, what do I mean by that? It's focusing on how you can serve, how you can make a difference, how you can contribute. That, it turns out, is when we feel our best, when we feel that we're living in purpose. We're living in alignment to our values. And we can find that ability to serve, to contribute, to help people in any role we're working in. And that was the big for me. Yeah.
Do you think that's really, like, have you found that to be true? Oh, I actually, tell us a little bit more about that, because, there's people who work in the pharma world who are not the scientists right on the cutting edge. They're support people or so forth. But you're reminding us that those roles are critical. Talk to us a little
Right.
bit about that.
Well, I say, I work just in the pharma community, but I say whether you sit at the reception desk at the front door or the CEO desk on the top floor, you are part of the contribution to improving lives. That's what our industry does, right? We help save and improve lives. And whatever you do, you're a part of that. I always think of, you may have heard this story of John F. Kennedy when he visited NASA in the 60s. Well,
No, no, tell it.
okay, back then everyone was focused on getting a man on the moon, right?
Right.
As the saying goes. And apparently he approached a janitor and said, "What do you do?" And that janitor stood up tall and proud and said, "Mr. President, I'm helping to put a man on the moon." Right? Clearly, he chose, and choice is a big thing here. He chose to be connected to the fact that if he didn't pick up that banana peel, Neil Armstrong might have tripped and not made the trip to the moon. So, yeah, whatever your role is, you can choose to connect the dots, you could say.
That's goosebump number one there. I got a
Oh,
little bit
good.
of goosebumps when you're telling that JFK story, because I see that in my working life all the time. As such good people are contributing in so many important ways. This is why I love the leadership angle that you're talking about, because I don't know that leadership in many business settings is making people feel like what they do
So
is
true.
critical to the right.
And that's, I think, a big mistake. We're focused on
Mhm,
incentives and other ways
mhm,
of trying to motivate people. When we can't motivate others, we can help them create that motivation within. And the
mhm.
best way to do that, and the least expensive way to do that, is help people connect to their why. Why does this work matter to you? Looking at
Yeah,
your own life
that's
and
it.
your own life story. Where does this come from for you?
Yeah,
The meaning.
yeah. Okay, so you have this wonderful little diagram that we can kind of divide our lives into three circles,
Mm.
and then there's this sweet spot in the middle.
So if you picture three circles that are overlapping, and then overlapping right in the middle, there's a sweet spot where the three of them overlap. And when we look at our purpose, people often, if I can, read the bubble in their mind, often they think of some version of their family. Right. My purpose is, of course, my three wonderful daughters, my husband, my
Mhm.
mother. Everything I do is to serve and support them. Right. That we can call our personal purpose. Often it's family, friends, faith fit in there.
Okay.
Right.
Mhm.
Then there's our organizational purpose, who you're working for. What is it that they're trying to do? What is the difference they're trying to make in the world? Right. And usually that's pretty boldly stated on a website. In pharma, every pharma company has it, right? We're here to save and improve lives somewhere, right? Then the third circle, and this is the one that I think is missing a lot for people, that's your role purpose.
Mm.
And it's an important leg of this three-legged stool that people just aren't focusing on or choosing to work on. That is, how does your role contribute to the organizational purpose? Daniel Pink, who I adore, I just adore him. I've had the pleasure of interviewing him a couple of times, and he's just a great thought leader. I encourage people to look him up, check out his work. In his book Drive, he summarized 50 years of research on what motivates us at work, with purpose being one of them, autonomy and mastery. But he talked about how often the big P, the organizational purpose, that's there, right? To save and improve lives, that's big, that's out there. But he says the little p, your role purpose, that's a lot quieter. People aren't quite connected to it. They get focused on their to-do list, right?
Right.
And they lose track of, right, everything I'm doing, what I'm trying to do is to help save and improve lives, right?
Right.
How do I link that? That's when the magic happens, when you connect all that.
Mhm. Mm. Okay. I just want to tell people, if you see me looking down and taking notes, A, I keep hash marks for how many times I get goosebumps during these interviews. And B, I also keep track of things like you just referenced. So people can just relax through this interview. If you go to the Goodness Exchange and the Conspiracy of Goodness podcast, part of the big website there, you can find this episode beautifully and fully written out in the form of an article, and the videos there. And I will make a link. So if people see me jotting down today, I'll make a link to every single book and video and the other things that Jill and I will reference, because we're both, that's one of the things we connected on. Gosh, we couldn't hardly stop talking about our
I
favorite
know, we
books
could
and
talk for hours.
podcasts, YouTube channels. We're going to try and share as much of that today as we can with people. Okay, so one of the most fascinating parts of your story is how you started. And this is one of the things
Mm,
I love to talk to people about, because People are always asking me, obviously I talk to and write about people who have found their purpose, what they were
Mm,
uniquely built to contribute. No doubt about it. They're in their zone of genius. Okay, but and most of us want to get there. Well, there are four things I could go on. I do some public speaking, and there are four ways that you find your purpose. And one of them equates to your story. It's very much
mm,
serendipity and not always good things that start you off
right.
on your purpose. So, and then we get there, and then we can't resist keeping on going. So, talk to us about your story.
Well, yeah. Why am I here? Why do I care? Why do I do this? I go back to when I joined the pharma industry. I came in with a background in psychology, and I looked around me, and everyone around me was really, really strong in the life sciences. And you can picture that muscle was really toned, but the behavioral science arm was a little weaker. That's the muscle that the skills of how we communicate and engage the person in front of us, so that we can collaborate and work together, that wasn't as good. And I was quite fascinated with this. So I did my master's in adult education with a focus on influencing healthcare behavior change. And I studied and researched this. And then something happened that really emphasized my passion for this, I guess. And that was, watching my father die as a result of a prescribing error. So being in our industry, I kept thinking about the closed door. What if my father's doctor's pharma rep or medical science liaison or the person from our industry had been better able to access and engage him to know the right product at the right time for the right patient, because that's what we are trying to do. So I kept studying this and I was learning things. I thought, oh gosh, if only my peers could know this, right? And I wanted to sing it from the rooftops. So I wrote a couple of books, created some programs, and then had this idea that, oh, maybe I could help change the industry instead of just, here in Canada, maybe we could do something. So we did that. We started being asked to speak, on stages around the world. We started a nonprofit group called the Aurora Project, which was trying to illuminate our path to something we call in our industry patient-centricity. What it really means is a focus on the patient. What a concept, right? Which you do
Mm,
so well in your practice. And you're like, I've been so impressed with what I've learned about you, and how, you have a chief happiness officer, and like, you're just the epitome of patient centricity. So I've been talking about this term about this concept since before it was a term. And that's what
mhm,
I love to do. And as I told you earlier, it was, when I was teaching people how to move forward, that I had this aha that it all starts with this foundation of being focused on serving, of helping, of making your difference with a noble intention, focusing on your
mhm,
purpose.
mm,
So, that brings us to today, really, where my favorite thing to do, like I'll do it on a
mm,
Friday night, is this power of purpose with people, helping people connect with their why.
mhm. Wow. Okay, so I don't want this point to be missed, is that somehow you had the wherewithal to recognize there was a prescribing error that essentially ended your dad's life. And
Mm,
instead of that becoming a burden for you, choosing a life of, regret and unhappiness and all
mm,
kinds of things that would some people would focus their energy on. You said it seems like you saw it as an opportunity. Like you recognized all the gaps in the system and you said,
feels,
"Oh my gosh, it
yeah,
wouldn't take that much for somebody to expose these gaps in a helpful way and
yeah,
develop the kind of systems that this won't happen to anybody else's dad."
yeah, exactly. I think that's fuel, right? And like you said at
Mhm,
the beginning, that can help us. That's one of the many triggers to help us find meaning in our work, right? So life throws all sorts of things at you, and it's what you do with it, what your choice
mhm.
is. Back to that word choice, right?
Yeah.
Barring any mental health issues, of course, but that choice we have to be purpose driven is so worth it. And often those things that happen, are they good? Are they bad? I love that episode that you did. Good thing, bad
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
Yeah,
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 Dr. Sweetkumar Rao, she's on it. Yeah, Dr. Sweetkumar Rao has this amazing episode with us. I'll put that in the show notes on the
yeah.
Goodness Exchange as well, about, taking the things that happen to us and just pause and
Pause.
resisting
Yes,
the urge to call
yes,
them good or bad.
yeah.
Just be with
Mm.
them in the moment and let some time pass and work with it. And a
What
lot
do
of
you do
times
with it?
some of the worst things in our life can turn out to be a good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize that Jill speaks to thousands of people,
Mm,
and she's particularly focused in the pharma industry. But she is helping people recognize what they're uniquely built to contribute, their why, their how, their what. So, talk to us a little bit about. Oh, of course, we're adding to the show notes here. Simon Sinek and how you see
mm.
his message fitting with what you do.
Yeah, if people haven't heard of Simon Sinek, I encourage them to check him out and follow him and his ideas. But he has a really famous TED Talk and book by the same name, Start With Why. And he
Mhm.
studied, what do the most influential communicators do differently than all the rest of us? There's a few of them up there that are really good communicators. What do they do differently than everybody else? And he summarized it by saying, well, they start with why, then how, then what. Most of us do the reverse. We start with
Yes.
our title, which is meaningless to people, maybe
Yeah.
get to what we do, rarely get to why we do it. But when we flip that around, when we share with someone, you know, doctor, as far as our reps meeting with doctors, doctor, before I get started, I know you may have a stereotype of me, and I just want to share with you why I'm here and what my intentions are. My story goes like this, and share their why first to let someone see, oh, you do have a noble intention. I can work with you. I can trust you.
Mm.
Trust is a big thing.
Yeah, trust is a big thing.
And it's important for the other person. It's also important for you, that start with why for yourself. When you wake up in the morning and you remember why you're there, just take a minute to go do big picture. Why am I here? Then that guides what you think, say, and do in a beautiful way.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about some really, I think, landscape expanding ideas that you have that just are going to make a lot of room for all of us to think differently about what we do in our working lives and beyond as well. So we'll take a break and we'll come back more with Jill Donahue. You know how the constant negative noise in our digital lives feels like it's reaching a boiling point? Now, many of us have tuned out the news and social media almost entirely. Well, it doesn't have to be that way. There are newsworthy stories about amazing progress, innovation, leaps in human potential, and wonders in the natural world, and they're just not reaching the top of our feeds. We can have access to this, but none of us has the time or maybe even the emotional stamina to search through all the doom and gloom news to find what's right with the world. Okay, enter the Goodness Exchange. There, we are giving instant access to positive news for curious people. Did you hear about the recent Harvard study that found that exposure to just 4 minutes of good news can make you 32% less anxious and 18% more optimistic? Well, I don't know about you, but I need those kind of numbers in my life. So, if you want to live with more joy and way less fear, it's really simple. First, you join us at the Goodness Exchange. Everyone around the world has the opportunity to access this kind of content. And we've promised no politics for about a decade, so you're safe from all that distraction as well. Second, you allow this new, more positive, balanced worldview to put a spring in your step again. It can change the way you react to your kids, your coworkers, everybody you come in contact with. And the stories we write about can make you the idea person in your circles. These challenging times call for us to wake up and take control of our perspective. The people who use the Goodness Exchange have the ability to react to the harshness of the world much different because they know way more about what's right with the world. And that's a resource. So, subscribe to the Goodness Exchange, our YouTube channel, and the podcast, and use this content to live a more expansive worldview. It is still an amazing world out there, and you can be a part of it. Welcome to the Conspiracy of Goodness. Okay, we're back with Jill Donahue. Jill is a leader, a speaker, an advisor in the world of big pharma, and she is helping to bring to light a lot of the amazing leadership, commitment, and noble intention there that, of course, we're just not hearing enough of because there is this other narrative about big pharma. And one of the stories that she tells is so wonderfully applied to all of our working lives. Can you share the story of Johnny Johnson with us?
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. People will say, well, I can't, I don't have a purpose. My role, I don't touch the patient in my job or other roles out there. Oh, I don't see the big picture here. And I think about Johnny Johnson, or people will say, well, my leader doesn't, they're not connected to purpose or why. And I'll say, well, I want to share with you a story about Johnny Johnson. So I met Johnny Johnson when I was on the shuttle bus at the airport in Phoenix, and he drove the bus, right? So he drove the bus in a circle all day long. So you might think, oh, he doesn't have much purpose in his role, and you'd be wrong. So what happened when we got on that bus was his voice boomed over the loudspeaker, welcome to my bus. It is my privilege and pleasure to serve such an elite group of people. And we all kind of look, right? Like normally subdued passengers kind of, what's going on, smiling. And he said, no, seriously, you guys are the ones who, not only had a dream of a trip, you made it happen. By the end of this short shuttle bus, he had us all smiling. And I got off the bus and I said, Johnny, where does this great energy come from? And he had this beautiful smile and he said, well, I had a choice. I came to this country with my master's degree from my home country. And I had a choice of what my day was going to look like. I chose to find meaning in my work. My role is to make people smile, right? He found how he could contribute, how he could help others in that role. His job was to make people smile. I said, well, you're sure doing that in spades. And I said, curious, you go home with this great smile on your face. Do you make more money than the other guys too? And he said, well, I make about $100 a day. And I said, well, what do the other guys do? 40. So he more than doubled his tips. And then he added, one day on my birthday, I made 500. I was like, oh my gosh. And then, the mic drop moment, he said, but, people are smart. It has to come from here. And he put his hand on his heart. And I was like, okay, there's my whole workshop right there, right? It's about authenticness, being authentically connected to your purpose. So there he is, going home with a smile on his face, making more money, feeling good that he's living a job with purpose, and he's driving a shuttle bus, right?
I think
And
we all
you've
could
met
tell
these
stories.
people. Yeah,
Yes,
exactly.
yes. We could
Right?
all tell stories. I remember a TSA guy that was just like that years
Exactly.
ago. One of the last times I ever flew before Thanksgiving from Vermont back to Illinois. That was a nightmare. But there was this guy in the TSA line, one of the TSA guys, who was like a stand-up comedian, mixed with your, second grade teacher, mixed with, some
Oh,
endearing,
wow.
neighbor that was just helpful in every possible way. He was amazing.
A
And
unicorn.
he was a unicorn. Yes, he was.
Yeah.
I call them the joyful ones. He was definitely the joyful
Yes.
ones.
And
So okay, so these are two, the Johnny Johnson story and my TSA agent guy.
yeah,
They're two great stories about, like we can't blame the fact that we're not working with joy or purpose on the fact that our leaders may not be doing it. I mean,
right. Yeah.
organizations might be
Oh,
not great at walking their talk, right? But there are pockets in all organizations that are just extraordinary.
yeah. Well, in fact, with the Johnny Johnson, we had a really negative experience with his manager back where we dropped off the rental car.
Oh no.
So, in spite of his poor leader, he chose to do this himself. And I say that to people. Yes, of course, it's ideal when this purpose starts with the leadership and trickles down. But you can choose that in your own life, in your own world, to focus on how you're serving, how you're helping people, how you're making a difference for
Hmm.
someone in your role.
Hmm.
You can choose to do that.
And another thing that you talk about, which I think is related here, is being able to rise way above and see. You say take the helicopter view of the
Mm,
golden threads that
in
run
your
through the
life. Yeah.
forest of our lives. Talk about that.
Yeah. So often, one of the things we do is try to help people see their story, why it matters to you to help people. Where does that come from? And we're often so busy in the forest of life, or you can think of yourself on the hamster wheel, right? Going, going, going. You don't have time to step off and look at where have you been and where are you going. And when, in that forest, you can't see the path in front of you. It's just trees and the path behind you is overgrown. But when you do that helicopter view, and we go through this 9-step interview that we do with people to help them identify where was that seed planted that made you someone who wanted to make a difference in the world, that made you someone who chose to listen to this podcast because you are searching for purpose and meaning. right?
Mm,
Where did that come from for
mm,
you? And the clearer you can see that, and most people, the stats are 90% of people are not connected to their purpose,
right.
sadly. And most people, when we say, what's your story? They're like, I don't have a story. My job was serendipitous. I did it because, it's good lifestyle. But when we dig deeper and peel back the layers of the onions, oh my gosh, there's so
Yes.
much there, right, in people's
Yes.
lives that helps
Yes.
them connect with, yes, that's why helping people is meaningful to me, you
Hmm.
know?
Yes, this is so important too. I guess in most of the stories of the thought leaders that I talk to, in most of their bios, most of them, in fact, can trace if
Yeah.
most of them know right away. Just yesterday, I was going to see whether yes, when your episode publishes, 2 episodes before your episode, I'm interviewing the first Black South African premier archaeologist in
Mm.
South Africa. She's an amazing woman who's in charge of this two big digs, one being the Rising Star Cave, where we're finding our human ancestors. We're doing the most extraordinary
Wow.
things 125,000 years ago. And we thought it was
Cool.
35,000. So we pushed it back 100,000 years. Anyway,
Oh my
she's an
gosh.
amazing woman. And she can remember the day she was sitting watching morning cartoons with her mother. And there was something on the TV about science and archaeology and paleo, dinosaurs and stuff like that. And she just turned to her mom and said, "I'm going to be the first
I'm gonna.
Black archaeologist in South Africa
Whoa.
one day." She
Wow.
remembers that moment. And
Yeah.
I think it's important that if we're feeling like we're not finding our purpose or meaning right now, do you think that a little bit of soul searching back to what we really loved as a child is important?
Oh, so much, so much. And maybe not even what you loved as a child, just some of your experiences. I think about,
Yep.
if someone had have asked me early on in my career, why are you here? Why did you come to Pharma? Why are you? And I started as a sales rep. Why are you a sales rep? Well, of course, immediately I would have said, well, my friend's a rep, and if she can do it, I can do it. And there, you get a free car, and they're going to put phones in cars. I'm going to be the coolest girl, giving away my age here, right? But yeah, that's going to be super cool, right? A lot of time people will say, well, the remuneration, that's why I'm here. Yeah, that's an outcome, right? But why can you find meaning in this work? So if someone had have gone through, this exercise with me and peeled back the onion, I would have realized, right, okay, my parents were both teachers. Education was super important to me. Not only were they teachers, they were really good teachers. They taught me about loving people and serving and helping others, right? And then thirdly, dad had a heart attack when I was in grade 9. So healthcare was really of interest to me, right? So that's what I brought to my role as a pharma rep. I saw my job as educating to help people. And that's
Right.
why I did so well, not promoting or any of that. It was about educating to help doctors help patients. And
Right.
that's why I did so well. And then you see how my purpose evolved as it does when I was 35 and dad died, and it
Mhm.
evolved, it got deeper. But
Mm.
that experience of how I was raised was part of the values, right? The values
Right.
that led to me finding
Mm.
meaning. How can in this job I find a way to help, to serve, to make a difference for
Yeah.
people?
This is lovely. How can people connect more with this message you're putting out there?
Yeah, I think what
Well,
I,
there's the
I
book.
yeah, there's the book for, yeah, absolutely. Go to the link that we'll put there. It's accelerate.ca/free book, accelerate with an
Mhm.
EX, and download that. But there's so many more books out there too on purpose. I
Okay.
think the main
Talk to
thing
me.
is that, yeah,
Tell me some of
about
your
those.
favorites. Yeah.
Yeah. And you know what, Linda, too? I've summarized a lot of my favorites, so I can send you a
Okay.
link to those
Okay,
summaries, like
good.
my top three ideas from
Yeah.
them: the purpose economy, the
Okay.
purpose effect,
Okay, great.
culture
Perfect.
code. There's so many. I'll send
Mhm.
you links to the summaries of them. And if we can just stimulate people to want to learn about it in this call,
Mhm.
to say, oh my gosh, there, that is key to my happiness and living a full life, is finding purpose and meaning in work. It's there for you to create. And if people are stimulated to want to investigate that, there is so much literature out there that we can share just a few of them.
All right. I have a feeling though people are going to go to the internet and say, whatever that you might Google, and it's going to feel like if I had a a really good guest that's talking about spirituality, and not in a religious sense, but just
Yeah.
how do we find that deeper meaning in our
Yeah.
lives. And he
Mm,
says, if you went to the internet and Googled spirituality, it's going to feel like the junk food aisle of the spiritual supermarket. I think finding your purpose, you'd wind up somewhere in that kind of mashup too. So what I'm going to do is make sure that this list she refers to is on the Goodness Exchange
excellent.
website in the
Yeah.
article for this podcast. All right, you've
Yeah.
got some great stories that you like to tell. Talk to us about triumphs of purpose. There's the Tylenol story and the
Oh,
Johnson
yeah.
and Johnson credo. That's such a beautiful story.
Yeah, and I don't know if listeners remember what age they're at or know the history of this, but there was a day many years ago where Tylenol capsules actually were killing people.
Mhm.
So there was someone who had laced them with cyanide, and there were a number of people, a handful of people, that died as a result of taking a simple Tylenol pill. This was pre-internet, and so there were people out with bullhorns announcing, throw out your Tylenol. Boy Scouts went door to door, etc. The famous marketers in the world said Tylenol is done, right? They're
Okay,
never going to survive.
just to clarify, this wasn't the public outcry for everybody to turn their back on their Tylenol. It was Tylenol themselves chose to
Well,
tell everybody to dump every bit of Tylenol they could.
that's right. Yeah. Well, and that's why, you would think that with this risk of Tylenol and this
Mhm.
news, the whole world knew. Well, I shouldn't say the whole world. This was in the US, but everybody knew Tylenol could kill you, right?
Right.
Yet, I bet you have Tylenol in your medicine cabinet.
Oh yes, for
I
sure.
know I do. Of course. Yeah, we
Yeah.
all do, right? Why?
Yeah.
Because Johnson and Johnson had just had a retreat years before that they had set out their credo, right,
Okay.
that said everything we do is to help mothers and fathers and children and people. Their mission, they had set out their purpose, their why, and they had just done a retreat to say, is that still who we are? Yes, it is. So when this tragedy struck, they knew exactly what they needed to do. They needed
Mm.
to immediately discontinue. They needed to have everyone throw out everything. Huge. Can you imagine the loss?
Can you
Right?
imagine?
Right?
But they owned it.
7 people were dead, but they owned it. They owned it. They
Mhm.
worked closely with all the investigators. And that's why trust remains. And that led to, remember, we're talking about good thing, bad thing? Well, the good thing that came out of that was that's what led to safety seals.
Oh,
We
right.
all have safety seals now, right? It changed
Yes.
all the packaging. Yeah,
Yes. That's right. For as hard
that
as
was the
much as
trigger.
aggravation, and we complain under our breath about trying to get into that bottle for the first time, it's
Yeah,
all there. Good thing,
yeah.
bad thing, because of that chapter in history,
Right. Yeah.
and we're all
Trust
safer
is a
for it.
huge, huge factor. And when we
Yeah,
lead
talk to
with
us
our
about
noble
trust.
intention, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, and that's a big topic in our industry, right? Because you alluded to it at the beginning that, our ranking in public trust is pretty low. There's some studies that say we're trusted as much as tobacco companies. And
Oh,
that,
no, big pharma is what you're referring
yeah,
to, right?
big pharma,
Yeah.
yeah. And that infuriates me. They take lives,
Oh.
we save lives. I just can't stand that. And what I know of pharma is amazing, wonderful, heartful, purpose driven people who are taking their special skill in the world. Often it's a science skill and helping, changing lives, right? Saving lives. I know I'm alive today because of pharma. My husband, so many people in my world are alive today because of medicines and medical
Mhm.
advancements. But that trust is so low. And I think one of the reasons is that people think we have our best intention in mind instead of theirs. And that's what I say to people. People are engaged most by those they trust, admire,
Mhm.
and believe care for them.
And that kind of ties into something that I do a lot of public speaking about, which is this thing I'm calling the gratitude economy. I think we are all looking for trusted advisors in our lives,
Yes.
whether it's our hairdresser or our pharma company or our, whatever, our dentist. We are looking for people that we can just leave it to them.
Yeah.
I trust them. It's going to be fine. And just we get that part of our life squared away because there's so much unpredictability out there.
That's right. Yeah.
And trust is so easily lost and hard won.
So true.
That
right?
yes, and in this gratitude economy that I keep saying is coming right now, what just a little context is that I think what we've been in since the advent of the newspaper and radio is what's like I would call the attention economy. People they made business advancements and notoriety advancements just by interrupting louder and louder and louder and trying to get our attention. But
Right.
now I think we're starting to turn our backs on all that. And we're looking for people who can be the trusted advisors. And I
Yes.
love that when I see companies doing things that seem kind of counterintuitive when it comes to gaining our trust. They're
Oh,
what Tylenol did was
yeah,
magnificent. But they had to have thought
exactly.
about it first, right? Like that didn't just wasn't just the way they'd react. They had a thoughtful process. They had gone through a thoughtful process to say, we have a credo and we're going to stick to
That's
it,
right.
thick or thin.
W- Exactly. Well, it's similar to in Dr. Albert Bourla, who's the CEO of Pfizer, in his book Moonshot, where he described the journey,
Right.
that race to getting the vaccine out.
Mhm.
He said the
Yeah.
biggest factor wasn't the science, wasn't the
Mhm.
technology. The biggest factor was the cultivation of a purpose driven culture
That's
pre
huge.
pandemic. That's what made the scientists stay up 24/7, right? Until this was
Yes.
done, who work around the
Mhm.
clock, think creatively, collaborate well. That trust is what emerged from that purpose driven culture,
Mhm.
right?
I've got that
It's
book
interesting.
somewhere in these piles right here behind
Oh,
me.
it's a really
Uh,
good one.
yes, it's a good book.
Yeah,
I would totally recommend it to people because if you can read through it and keep the bigger picture in mind or what's happening in your life in mind, you
yeah,
can think through things you're going through with your family a little bit differently because that's what they
exactly.
did.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
kept their eye on the big picture. They began with the
I'm
end in
making a
mind.
difference. Yeah, I'm
Right.
serving, of helping.
Mhm.
You're talking about back to the trust thing. I have a client where we do this power of purpose with everyone in the organization, and they have such outcomes of that trust. For example, our client told me the other day that the patient advocacy group said to him, we work with 17 companies in this space. None of them do we trust as much as you. And that's why we're
Oh,
working with you, right?
oh, nice.
When you lead with purpose, that noble intention, people see you, they trust you, they want to collaborate with you. And that's when we can all do our best work. Just lead with
Totally.
purpose. Yeah.
That's whether you're no matter your role,
Right.
no
Exactly.
matter your role in whatever you're
Focus
doing
on
in life.
serving, on helping.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Nice. So,
Hmm.
you talk about the stages. Can an individual apply the four, you've got four stages of a tree that's pretty neat. I'll put
Mm,
that diagram on the article
mm,
too. But talk us
hmm.
through that if you can, and we'll make sure that the image is on the article.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So when you look at a growth of a tree and you start with a seed and then it grows to a sapling, a bigger tree, and then finally a fruit bearing tree, what is the order? And so I have this slide where there's four words. I've talked about being patient focused, right? Being focused on your why, your purpose. I've talked about trust. I've talked about profitability because that's a key factor too, and engagement. What's the order of that? And I'll say to people, what's the seed of that growth? And they'll say, well, trust.
Okay.
Yes. Yes, of course, except we dropped that seed, right? We don't have trust. And often in our world, you don't have trust going in, right?
Yeah.
So what's the seed that you can plant? Well, that's your purpose, your focus on serving. For us in pharma, it's that patient focus. You lead with that. That grows into the sapling of trust. Trust then allows you to engage, to collaborate. And that engagement then allows you to create profitability. That's the fruit bearing tree. The fruit falls, creates more seeds that allow us to continue to focus, to better help those patients, and to continue to find new cures and treatments in our case,
Mhm.
right? Gosh, we've got
Mm.
a lot of, I really hope somebody's working really hard on Alzheimer's right now, for example, right?
Oh, yeah. Gosh, we could
And
go
that's our
on, right?
sustainable
Mhm.
cycle, right?
Yeah.
Profitability is key in there to continue that cycle.
You might think that dentists, if you think of your dentist as a Porsche driving, on his third marriage, golfing guy,
Right, right.
and it's a stereotype of dentists, just like in Big Pharma, we all
Sure.
have these stereotypes. You might think that a dentist would put profit first
Profit
and
first.
then
Yeah.
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 And then the whole thing would go the opposite direction. But you make such a good point that, if we work with and teach our people to work beside us with this in the right order, the profit takes care of itself.
Exactly. Sort of like the watch pot never boils. Where are you putting your focus? If you're focusing on market share, on profitability, you're not going to get there as fast as if you're focusing
Mhm.
on serving, on helping, on your purpose. And then, oops, look what happened when you weren't even looking. The profit
Yes.
followed. And there's many studies, people say, oh yeah, it's nice for you to say that, but this is based in evidence. I
Mhm.
work in a very evidence-based industry. So there's evidence behind all of this incredible research that has been done that proves purpose-driven organizations outperform all the others.
Mm.
That seems so obvious then to do it, but it does take work. It does take
Mhm.
effort. That's the thing, right? To be purpose-driven takes effort. It doesn't just, you can't just say, be purpose-driven. You have to
Yeah.
help people connect
It
with that.
takes effort. And what if we called it, it takes an investment, and that's an investment
Yeah.
of time and energy and
Yes.
focus. One of the
Yeah.
things that when we realized how important the right order of the things you just mentioned were
Yeah.
at our dental practice, we have 14
Mm.
employees. And so it's really important to get everybody on the same page. And we created a position in our office called the Chief Happiness
I
Officer.
love
So we
that.
actually have a CHO. And in our dental practice, we had the same mission statement for 30 years. First, patients keep their teeth their whole life. Second, we do it in a happy work environment. And third, we make enough money to do it again next year.
Yeah.
That's actually
There
the
you
word.
go.
Okay.
That's
Okay.
the tree. That's the same thing.
That's the tree. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So what I have to tell you is, unfortunately, my husband and I focus almost solely on the top one. Patients keep their teeth their whole life. We hired the best people. We used the best materials. We learned computer dentistry in 2003. It was just all about
Before it
that
was,
top one.
yeah.
Well, and the second one, do it in a happy work environment. We just didn't. We just thought it would that people would just join us and they'd be happy to be working for purpose
Mm,
with purpose, but we didn't invest
there you
in a
go.
happy work environment. So when we created this whole position, that's nothing else.
Yes.
It's not like our office manager and the chief happiness officer or a dental assistant and the chief officer. We have someone who's actually their whole job is to create a
I
happy work
love
environment
that.
for patients and team. And I bring that up in that, that was a financial commitment. It was a organizational commitment because nobody even knew what the heck I was talking about when I ran in and said, we're going to have a chief officer.
But it was brilliant.
It took a
Brilliant
year
idea.
for it to sort of pan out
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
be understandable. But now I know they would never in a trillion years let Erin get away. This is a wonderful woman that we found had just the right personality style for that. But I mention it
Oh,
in that that in our organizations, we can be the chief happiness officer, whether we got bonked on the head and told we needed to or not. I mean, it's something we can, happiness is something you choose ahead of time. Do you
that's
agree with
right.
that?
Oh, totally agree with that.
Mm,
Absolutely. And I think you should do a whole episode on your chief happiness officer and how you did it and all the pros. I'm sure there's a lot of people listening who'd love to know more about that. And managers of teams, they can be, they can think of themselves as the chief happiness officer because the results
mm,
from that are so
mm.
tangible. Yeah, so
Yeah.
important. That choice, it's the same that, I think maybe you're the same as me, but there was a time when I used to think, happiness, well, that's over there, right?
Yes.
After the kids are out of diapers. Okay. Okay. After the kids are out of this stage. Okay. Then when I finish my degree. Okay. And then at some point you get hit on the head and you realize, wait a minute, happiness has got to be right here, right now. I've got to make this
Right.
choice to work on this. And yes, it takes more muscles to smile than to frown. It takes more work, but man, is it worth it. And that all connects with the whole purpose thing, right? Taking that effort.
You've got an amazing topic that you talk about, which I think I want to be sure and share before we wrap this interview up. You talk about how purpose drivenness, once you get there, it opens a whole new world of curiosity, creativity, and
Mm.
collaboration.
Yeah. So whether you call it side effects of becoming purpose driven or primary endpoints, it's all good news. So when you connect with the meaning, with the why behind your work, you go home happier. You do better at your work. You become more collaborative, more creative. And there's numbers, there's percentages here in the research that show this. Less sick, live longer. There's a study from Blue Zones that says purpose-driven people live 7 years longer, right? And if that's not enough, there's a study I found that said purpose-driven people are more attractive. So there's tons of evidence out there that show the benefits, not just to the individual. I always say being purpose driven is unequivocally the best thing that is good for, like in my industry, it's good for healthcare. right? It's
Yes.
good for you, the pharma employee, or whatever employer you are. It's good for your company, and it's good for all of us because we all are or will be patients or caregivers at some point, right? So it's just
Yeah.
good for everyone. The problem is most of us aren't purpose driven. That's the gap. That's what I'm trying to change, because it's just good for everybody when
It is.
when we do connect with it.
So, what do you think, as we wrap up here? I always like to finish up with, some simple thought. There's a great
Mm,
Blaise Pascal quote that says, always walk with something beautiful in your
mm,
mind so that you can
I
reference
love
it in the
that.
darker times. That's a
Yeah,
paraphrase. He says it much more beautifully than that. But in any case, we all need to carry something with us to grab onto. So,
yeah.
you're talking about a lot of really important concepts that open up possibilities for us all. If you tuned into the news or caught social media and then you're just like, what do you really wish people knew?
I think back to uh, the final days with my dad. Oh, sorry.
Hmm.
And I had the privilege of being in the ICU with him on those final days, and we had some amazing conversations. And we watched the hockey game too. But in those amazing conversations, it came down to with him trying to pass on to me his lessons in his life, and he was just such a wonderful man. And it came down to this, Linda. It's all about people. It's all about loving people. Just love people. And I think that is foundational. And I don't mean romantic love, of course. I mean just compassion and love for people. And that is what will fuel your purpose. Because when you love and care about people, that will lead you to want to help them. And purpose comes from helping people.
Right.
So lead with that fosters that spirit of service and this desire to help others. And then purpose brings meaning. And then
Hmm.
that leads to some of the other things you said. That leads to us to our desire to be curious. I think curiosity is so important. I wish everyone understood the values of curiosity. And that leads us to do other important things, like taking the high road, right?
Mhm.
Choosing the difficult yes versus the easy no. Being kind, right? It fits in here as one of the most important things, I think, to do. And that leads you to, assume best intent, keeps your blood pressure down. All these things start with love. Choosing an abundance mentality versus a scarcity mentality comes out of that as well. And then sharing your abundance comes out of that as well, which I think forgiveness, forgiving generously comes out of
Yes.
that love as well as caring for yourself, being really conscious of what you feed, not
Mhm.
just your mouth, but your mind, your body, and your soul. What are you feeding that? When we start with a place of love for others and ourselves, that grows into connecting with meaning and purpose and all those other things that I think are so important to help our world go round. So I
Yeah,
guess that
yeah,
was
yeah.
more
We've
than
got to get
one
we've
thing, but
Yeah. Yeah, no, we've got to get people acting around their best impulses, which is
yeah,
everything you
yeah,
just mentioned, right?
yeah,
And away from our worst impulses.
yes,
And that's not that hard. Well, I guess what you and I were saying, my own journey has a story of purpose, which we'll share sometime, how I first got into this good news thing 10 years ago. But
yeah,
almost everybody who is doing something they're just throwing themselves at gladly every day, they have found something that they're uniquely built to contribute through the kind of introspection that you're talking about.
yes,
And so I
yeah,
want people to go directly to the Goodness Exchange, look at find this article in the podcast and look at Jill's list, because that could be what's next. Is you
yeah,
could
a
find your next
spark.
steps there. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Keep
Well, thank you
exploring.
so much. And if you're interested in the pharma industry, or you just really want to hear some good stories that'll reshape your worldview, this is another
Mhm.
thing I'm talking about a lot these days, Jill, is that we've got to care about our worldview as much as we do our abs.
I know, right?
We're spending
Absolutely.
so much time
Yeah,
worrying
yeah,
about our abs or whatever, and
yeah,
not our worldview. And our worldview is where we lead from every day with our kids or our colleagues at work or the guy who cuts us off in traffic. So
yeah.
Jill's book, I can highly recommend will expand your worldview. Even if you don't give a hoot about big pharma, what you're going to find there. I interviewed somebody, one of the people she's written about. I've already talked to him
Oh,
just yesterday, and I'm
yeah.
telling you, oh my gosh, ooh, I just got
Right?
goosebumps again.
I
This
know.
free ebook that she is offering to the world, a dose of inspiration, 100 purpose stories from pharma leaders. You are going to have a spring in your step just to know and start questioning the narrative that the media is telling us,
Mhm.
just to know that the truth is always way beyond the limiting beliefs that the media usually leaves with us. And we need to
Mhm.
know about people that are inspirational in all industries. So thank you so much for doing that work, Jill.
Oh, it's been such a pleasure. Yeah, and
All right,
thank
well,
you for showcasing it. Thank you for chatting. Really lovely. Thank you
let's
for your work. Oh my
let's
gosh, I am telling the whole world about what you're doing, Linda. It's just
oh, I
incredible,
know.
and you're in my ears on every dog walk now, listening to Conspiracy of Goodness. Just loving meeting all those people.
Oh,
The
that's so
world is a
kind of
better
you.
place because of you. I just have to say that. Yeah, you are
That is so
changing
kind of
things. So
you.
thank you.
Well, it is somebody different from an entirely different genre every week. And now that I've done 170 of these interviews, I live right by what I say. It is still an amazing world.
It
There is
sure
an
is.
enormous wave
Yeah.
of goodness and progress out there. We just aren't hearing about it. And engaging with people like you and your book will remind us of that. And we can walk with a spring in our step again. So thank you, Jill Donahue. In the meanwhile, check out the Goodness Exchange at least 4 minutes a day. There's some Harvard science that says if you just spend 4 minutes a day engaging with good news, you're going to be 32% more grateful, 18% less overwhelmed. And those kind of numbers we can all use in our life. So I hope you take away the joyful and enlightening things that we said, and you have a great week. Thank you so, so much.